Okay, so I really just wanted to say more about this book that I just read this week, The Religious Mind. So Jonathan Haidt, again, social psychologist, talks about basically the reasons why there's sort of this liberal conservative divide, especially in Western culture. And, he uses a lot of psychological research and studies to demonstrate this. And so this is the work of moral psychologists that have determined the fundamental reasons why it is that liberals and conservatives have these disagreements about things like politics and religion. So, again, it's important to note that the conclusions of this text, it's not just hypothetical. It's based in a huge variety of studies that have been done on individuals, on child development, on groups, on communities and social whole societies and how they interact, how they operate. It includes anthropological studies, just things that things that we've discovered in terms of our own history as humans. There's so much. So the data demonstrates the conclusions here. So these are not just these are not just ideas that are made up out of nowhere. They're conclusions that are being drawn from what we know about humanity. So the book has three main parts, and the first part talks about how intuition precedes our strategic reasoning. And so the idea here, the metaphor that he uses, is that it's like a rider on an elephant. The elephant is the intuition, and the rider is the strategic reasoning. And this shows that the intuition is really what's in control, and it's much more powerful, and it comes prior, so it's the one that's leading, really. Where sometimes we think that the rider or the strategic reasoning is leading, but that's actually not the case. The choices that we make and the inclinations that we have are more than anything intuitive without any sort of logical reason behind it. What comes as a response to our intuition is a way of trying to reason through it, trying to give a justification that comes after the fact. So with this metaphor, the elephant, the intuition, it moves wherever it wants, but the rider has kind of come along as an aid to this, and it can eventually sort of sway the elephant to move in one direction or another, but it doesn't have the power of controlling it. The intuitions are as they are, and the strategic reasoning just gives some sort of substance as to why, but also it's not entirely in control. It can sort of sway it a little bit, but not completely. Now, in terms of the purpose of the book, this divide between the way people think about political or religious topics, this is relevant because there's so much disagreement, and we can't really communicate successfully in a lot of arenas because our intuitions are what are leading us, and oftentimes we can't describe those very well. And ultimately, we don't really care what the reasoning is of the other side. We are just, we're being completely guided by that intuition, kind of that guttural response. So the second part of the book talks about what are the bases for moral intuitions or moral reasoning. And Haidt makes the point that there are more than just care versus harm. So many of us, and honestly, liberals in particular, might be tempted to suggest that the foundation for morality is how much you're caring for others, or how much others are being harmed, or how much you're experiencing suffering, or something like this. But there's more than just that. A variety of studies has showed that there really are five, initially, they saw that there are five sort of dynamics of morality. One is care versus harm. Another is fairness, which I'll talk about more in a minute. You have loyalty, authority, and sanctity. Now, the loyalty, authority, and sanctity are really on the level of communities. So you're loyal to a group or a system. The authority is a question of what you attribute goodness to be coming from. Who is the authority that determines what is right versus wrong? And sanctity is this factor of how we eat or how we dress, things that might seem superficial, but actually a lot of communities, a lot of societies around the world find a moral connection between the simple ways that we live our lives, things that might seem cultural, but they deem them as actual moral factors. Now, after some of these initial studies, what they noticed was the second one, the fairness issue, really there's a nuance of difference between largely how some liberals and others, conservatives, think about fairness. There are kind of two dimensions to this one, and one is equality, the other is proportionality. So it's not just a matter of fairness isn't just everyone getting what they need, or maybe everyone just being equal to each other. The fairness aspect for specifically conservatives has to do with proportionality. You're getting what you deserve, whether that's a lot of good or a lot of bad. And so this is largely language of conservatives, but they determine that really everyone kind of exhibits this idea of fairness. And so it might be articulated differently, but we all kind of have these two dimensions of an idea of fairness, equality and proportionality. So what Haidt and others conclude from these findings, interestingly, is that liberals really only work or think in the space of these first three, care, and the two sort of types of fairness. Whereas conservatives think and operate on the scope of all six of these. And that's very interesting. The way that these two groups differentiate fairness is one small piece, but what's significant is the fact that conservatives really think on the spectrum of loyalty, authority, and sanctity a lot more than people who are naturally liberal. And this is also an important point to make. Ultimately, and this is an idea that actually kind of blew my mind hearing this data, the idea, which I have heard the idea before, that liberalism and conservatism is really more of a personality. It's a tendency towards wanting to preserve versus a tendency to progress. However, this is actually true even on the genetic level. Like literally in our genes, there are ways that we can measure how a person might be, might have a propensity towards being more liberal and another towards being more conservative. Now, to get the full scope of how this is relevant, you have to move on to the third part of the book, which talks about how humans are not simply selfish, we are really groupish. And the metaphor that he uses for this is that we are 90% chimpanzees and 10% bees, as in like a beehive. And so there are these various ways that we operate as individuals, but on the scope of whole societies, we have this innate tendency to cultivate these systems of groups and operate together as one. And so there are a variety of ways that our cognitive science shows how it's essential for a society to flourish as a result, or as it emerges out of the way that we work together as sort of a team. And this is where the ideas of loyalty and authority and sanctity come into play a lot more.